Jacob Fatu is in surgery right now with injuries so severe that doctors are telling his family to prepare for the possibility that his wrestling career might be over before it ever really began. Drew McIntyre didn't just attack Jacob Fatu on SmackDown, he systematically destroyed him with a level of violence that has WWE's medical staff questioning whether they should have intervened sooner and whether Drew should face criminal charges for what he did. The Samoan werewolf, the most intimidating and physically dominant performer WWE has introduced in years, is lying on an operating table having emergency surgery to repair damage to his knee, his shoulder, and potentially his neck from Drew's relentless assault with steel steps, chairs, and the ring post. And the most infuriating part? Drew McIntyre is celebrating what he did, posting on social media about how he put down the dog and promising to do the same thing to every other member of the bloodline until Roman Reigns has nobody left. When I reveal the exact extent of Jacob's injuries that WWE tried to keep quiet, when I show you the disturbing footage that was cut from the broadcast because it was too graphic, and when I explain why Solo Sikoa is being blamed by the Anoa'i family for not protecting Jacob better, you're going to be devastated by how close we came to witnessing a tragedy on live television. Let me take you through what happened on SmackDown step by horrifying step, because understanding the full sequence of events makes it clear that this wasn't just a wrestling angle gone too far. This was Drew McIntyre making a conscious decision to hurt Jacob Fatu in ways that go beyond the acceptable boundaries of professional wrestling. The segment started innocently enough with Solo Sikoa cutting a promo in the ring about the Bloodline's dominance and their plans to destroy everyone who challenges their authority on SmackDown. Jacob Fatu was standing beside Solo as the enforcer and the muscle, looking intimidating as always but not saying anything because his role is to be the silent destroyer. Drew McIntyre's music hit, and the crowd erupted because Drew has been on this path of destruction for weeks and everyone knew his confrontation with the Bloodline was inevitable. Drew walked to the ring with that intense focused energy that has defined his recent character work, carrying a steel chair in one hand and a microphone in the other. He entered the ring and stood face to face with Jacob Fatu, completely ignoring Solo Sikoa as if the Bloodline's leader wasn't even worth acknowledging. Drew stared into Jacob's eyes and said, "You're the one everyone is scared of. You're the monster. You're the Samoan werewolf. But I've fought monsters before, and I've put every single one of them down. You're next." Jacob stepped forward, chest to chest with Drew, accepting the challenge without words because Jacob doesn't need to talk to be threatening. The crowd was at fever pitch anticipating this clash between two of the most physical and intense performers on the roster. Then Drew did something unexpected and dangerous that should have been the first warning sign that this wasn't going to be a normal wrestling confrontation. Drew swung the steel chair at Jacob's knee, not his back or his chest where wrestlers are trained to take chair shots safely, but directly at his knee with full force. The sound of metal hitting bone was sickening. Jacob immediately collapsed, clutching his knee, and you could see on his face that this wasn't selling, this was genuine pain. Drew had aimed for Jacob's knee specifically because he knew that injuring a big man's mobility is how you neutralize their threat. Solo Sikoa tried to intervene, but Drew swung the chair at Solo too, catching him in the ribs and sending him rolling out of the ring. This left Jacob alone and vulnerable with a predator who had just demonstrated he had no interest in following the unwritten rules that keep wrestlers safe. Drew dropped the chair and dragged Jacob to the corner by his injured leg. Jacob was trying to fight back, throwing punches and trying to create distance, but the damage to his knee had already compromised his ability to move effectively. Drew positioned Jacob's leg between the ring post and the steel steps on the outside of the ring, and the crowd started chanting "Please don't" because everyone could see what was about to happen. Drew backed up to get momentum, and then he kicked the steel steps with all his strength, crushing Jacob's knee between the steps and the unforgiving steel post. Jacob's scream of pain was real and terrible. You could hear it echoing through the arena even over the crowd noise. WWE immediately cut to a different camera angle, trying to avoid showing the full extent of what Drew had done, but the damage was obvious. Jacob was writhing in agony, his knee was already swelling visibly, and medical personnel were frantically signaling from backstage that they needed to get involved. But Drew wasn't done. This is where the attack crossed from aggressive to criminal, from pushing boundaries to potentially ending a career. Drew pulled Jacob out of the corner and applied the figure 4 leglock, his submission finisher, but he didn't just apply it normally. Drew grabbed the bottom rope for leverage, which is illegal but adds tremendous pressure to the hold, and he wrenched on Jacob's already injured knee with the clear intent to cause maximum damage. Jacob was trapped with nowhere to go, tapping frantically on the mat to submit, but there was no referee to break the hold because this wasn't an official match. Drew held the figure 4 for what felt like an eternity, torturing Jacob while Solo Sikoa and other Bloodline members tried to get back into the ring to save their brother. When Drew finally released the hold, Jacob's knee was bent at an unnatural angle. He couldn't put any weight on it. He couldn't even move without screaming in pain. But Drew still wasn't finished. He picked up the steel steps, the same steps he had used to crush Jacob's knee, and he lifted them over his head. The crowd was screaming at Drew to stop, officials were running down the ramp trying to prevent what everyone knew was coming, but Drew threw the steel steps down directly onto Jacob's knee with devastating impact. The image of Jacob Fatu, the unstoppable Samoan werewolf who had destroyed everyone put in front of him, lying helpless on the mat clutching his destroyed knee with tears of pain streaming down his face, that's going to haunt WWE programming for weeks. Medical personnel finally reached Jacob and immediately called for a stretcher, putting his leg in an air cast before even attempting to move him. The way they were handling Jacob with such extreme care made it obvious this was a legitimate injury requiring immediate medical attention, not just selling for a storyline. But here's where Drew McIntyre revealed just how ruthless and remorseless he is about what he just did. As Jacob was being loaded onto the stretcher, as medical staff were rushing to get him stabilized and transported, Drew grabbed a microphone and stood over Jacob's prone form. Drew said, "This is what happens when you align yourself with Roman Reigns. This is what happens when you think being part of the bloodline makes you untouchable. Jacob, you came to WWE with all the hype, all the expectations, everyone talking about how dominant you were going to be. And I just ended all of that in less than 10 minutes. Your knee is destroyed. Your career might be over. And it's your own fault for choosing the wrong side." The crowd was booing Drew intensely, throwing trash at him, chanting "You're a psycho" and other insults, but Drew just smiled and soaked in the hatred. He continued in solo, "Roman, everyone else in the bloodline, take a good look at Jacob right now. Take a good look at what I'm capable of when I decide someone needs to be eliminated. Because Jacob is just the first. Every single one of you is going to end up on a stretcher or worse before I'm done with my campaign against the bloodline. And there's nothing you can do to stop me." Jacob was wheeled out of the arena and taken directly to a local hospital where he underwent emergency evaluation. The initial diagnosis was devastating and much worse than WWE initially reported. Jacob suffered a torn ACL in his right knee, a partially torn meniscus, damage to the MCL and PCL, and the orthopedic surgeons examining him said the structural integrity of the knee was so compromised that Jacob would need immediate reconstructive surgery followed by 6 to 9 months of rehabilitation before he could even consider returning to any kind of physical activity. But the knee injury wasn't the only concern. During the attack, when Drew threw the steel steps onto Jacob's leg, the impact was so severe that it also caused a tibial plateau fracture, which is a break in the shin bone near the knee joint. This type of injury is serious and can have long-term complications including arthritis, chronic pain, and permanent mobility limitations. The medical team also discovered that Jacob had suffered a separated shoulder at some point during the attack, though it's unclear exactly when that injury occurred because the assault was so sustained and so violent. The emergency surgery Jacob underwent was extensive, lasting over 4 hours. Surgeons had to reconstruct his ACL using a graft from his other leg, repair the meniscus tears, stabilize the tibial plateau fracture with pins and screws, and address the ligament damage. The surgery was successful in the sense that they were able to repair the immediate damage, but the long-term prognosis is uncertain. Jacob will need months of physical therapy, and there's no guarantee he'll ever regain the explosiveness and agility that made him such a unique and dangerous performer. The Anoa'i family's reaction to Jacob's injury has been intense and reportedly divided. Some family members are furious at WWE for allowing Drew McIntyre to work so recklessly and for not intervening sooner when it became obvious the attack was going beyond what was safe or acceptable. They're questioning whether WWE's desire for shocking television moments took priority over protecting their talent, and whether there should have been better communication and safety protocols in place to prevent something like this from happening. Other family members, particularly some of the veterans who have been in the wrestling business for decades, are directing their anger at Solo Sikoa for not protecting Jacob better. The argument is that Solo, as the leader of this version of the bloodline, had a responsibility to ensure his faction members were safe and that he failed in that responsibility by allowing Jacob to be isolated and vulnerable to Drew's attack. Roman Reigns himself has reportedly been critical of Solo's leadership, suggesting that this never would have happened under Roman's watch because Roman always ensured the bloodline worked as a cohesive unit that protected each other. Drew McIntyre's response to the criticism and backlash he's receiving for injuring Jacob has been defiant and unapologetic. Drew posted on social media, "Wrestling is a rough business. If you can't handle the physicality, if you can't protect yourself, then you don't belong in the ring with me." Jacob Fatu learned that lesson the hard way. "Everyone else in the bloodline should take notes because I'm just getting started." That attitude has made Drew even more hated by fans and by other wrestlers who feel like he's crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed and is now bragging about it. WWE's official response has been to suspend Drew McIntyre indefinitely for conduct detrimental to the safety of WWE superstars and to announce that he will face serious consequences for his actions. But backstage sources are reporting that WWE management is actually pleased with the heat and attention this situation has generated, and that Drew's suspension is just for show while they let the controversy build before bringing him back as an even more dangerous heel. That kind of cynical calculation where WWE uses legitimate injuries as storyline fuel is exactly what frustrates wrestlers and fans who want the company to prioritize safety over ratings. The question of whether Drew should face actual legal consequences beyond WWE's internal discipline is being debated among fans and legal experts. What Drew did could potentially be classified as assault or aggravated assault depending on the jurisdiction and how prosecutors view the context of professional wrestling. Jacob Fatu was performing his job when Drew deliberately targeted his knee with weapons and submissions designed to cause injury. Even within the context of wrestling where some violence is expected, there are boundaries, and Drew's actions could be argued to have exceeded what Jacob consented to as part of his employment. However, the reality is that wrestling's legal status as predetermined entertainment creates complicated questions about consent and responsibility. Jacob signed a contract that presumably includes acknowledgement of risk and waivers of certain legal claims. Proving that Drew went beyond what was reasonable or expected within wrestling would be difficult, and WWE would almost certainly oppose any attempt to pursue criminal charges because it would set a precedent that could threaten the entire industry's ability to portray violence in their programming. The impact on SmackDown storylines is massive because Jacob Fatu was positioned as the Bloodline's most physically intimidating member and their primary enforcer. Without Jacob, the Bloodline loses the fear factor that made them feel truly dominant and dangerous. Solo Sikoa will need to either recruit a replacement enforcer or fundamentally change how the Bloodline operates to compensate for Jacob's absence. This could actually be an opportunity for Solo to step up and become more physically dominant himself, but it could also expose weaknesses in the faction that their rivals will exploit. Drew McIntyre's character has been elevated to an entirely new level of heel heat through this attack. He's not just a tough guy or a competitor with an edge. He's now positioned as someone genuinely dangerous who will end careers without hesitation or remorse. That makes Drew's eventual comeuppance even more important because audiences need to see him face consequences that feel proportional to the damage he's caused. Simply losing a match won't be enough. Drew needs to suffer physically and emotionally in ways that make his destruction of Jacob Fatu feel avenged. The potential for Jacob Fatu's return storyline is incredible if WWE handles it properly. Imagine Jacob coming back after months of grueling rehabilitation, physically scarred but mentally even more dangerous because of what he went through. Imagine Jacob hunting Drew McIntyre with single-minded determination, not just wanting to beat Drew but wanting to inflict the same career-threatening injuries that Drew inflicted on him. That revenge storyline could be one of the most emotionally compelling and satisfying payoffs WWE produces, but it requires patience and long-term planning that WWE doesn't always demonstrate. The medical community's response to Jacob's injury and surgery has been to emphasize how serious these types of knee injuries are and how uncertain the recovery timeline can be. Even with successful surgery and intensive rehabilitation, there's no guarantee that Jacob will return to his previous level of athletic performance. Athletes who suffer multiple ligament tears and fractures often struggle with confidence in the injured joint, experience chronic pain or instability, and may need to modify their style to avoid re-injury. For someone like Jacob whose entire presentation is based on explosive power and agility, these limitations could fundamentally change how effective he is as a performer. The wrestling community has rallied around Jacob with messages of support and encouragement flooding social media. Fellow wrestlers, fans, and industry veterans have all expressed their concern for Jacob's health and their hope for his full recovery. There's genuine affection for Jacob as a person and respect for him as a performer, which makes this injury feel personal to many people in ways that typical wrestling storylines don't. The hashtag Pray for Jacob has been trending, with fans sharing their favorite Jacob Fatu moments and discussing how much they're looking forward to his return. Jacob Fatu undergoing surgery after Drew McIntyre's brutal attack represents one of the most serious injury situations WWE has dealt with in recent years. Whether this becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of blurring the line between wrestling performance and legitimate violence, or whether it becomes the foundation for an incredible comeback story and revenge angle, depends entirely on how WWE handles the next several months. Right now, Jacob Fatu is fighting to save his career and his mobility. Drew McIntyre is positioned as the most hated man in WWE, and the bloodline is fractured and vulnerable without their enforcer. The only question is whether WWE will honor the seriousness of what happened and build toward a satisfying resolution, or whether they'll treat this as just another storyline beat that gets forgotten when the next big angle comes along. Jacob deserves better than that, and so do the fans who are genuinely concerned about his health and his future.